always writing a novel. You've actually got to finish them sometimes. But The Rag Witch came out in Australia in 1991, and it wasn't really a success. It did okay. It got some good reviews. It sold a print run. It went, very quickly out of print. And a friend of mine at that time said to me, well, I guess you're just going to be a one-book wonder. He's a very good friend. Only very good friends are allowed to say stuff like that. But this amongst other things, I think spurred me on to continue writing. And after The Rag Witch, my next book was Sabriel, which is really the book that changed everything for me, because even though it got off to a slow start in Australia and then America, it just kept on going, and it kept on going and kept on going. And then eventually, and I made this myself just the other day, eventually I made this of all my, these are all the British covers of all my books. And I actually made it so I can go back to Australia and throttle my friend with it. Just to show him I'm not a one-book wonder. But I look, and actually you can tell that I put this together when I was a bit jet lagged, because I think one of them's upside down somewhere along here. Obviously I shouldn't be allowed to make things like this. My brother, who's an animator and has an animation studio, offered to make me a beautiful PowerPoint presentation of all my covers. I said, no, I don't want one of those. I want a bodgy, sticky tape cover one. I think that works better. But I look back at all these books, and I do wonder, how I managed to write them. Every time I finish a book, I'm astonished that I've actually managed to do so, which sounds a bit strange when you look at it. I think I've written a lot of books, but every single time I'm still astonished that I have in fact managed to finish another one. I'm also standing up talking to people like here. I'm also quite astonished that people want to listen to me talk about my books as well. So I'm always very pleased that that is in fact the case. So I had quite a slow start in becoming a published author, and it continued slow, because one of the things I left out when showing between The Rag Witch and Sabriel, it just looks like The Rag Witch came out and then Sabriel came out. There's actually a gap of about 4 years there, and in that space there should be another cover for the second book, the book I wrote after The Rag Witch, which also has never been published. So even after my first novel came out, I couldn't get the next one published, which is kind of like a reversal of expectation. And this was because I wrote a personal book, I guess, a book that I thought was a really great idea because it would suit my very eclectic reading tastes. And I wrote a thriller about a publisher who gets a manuscript, which is a Regency romance, which actually contains encoded data about this huge criminal conspiracy. And every second chapter was the Regency romance of the manuscript. So it was thriller, Regency romance, thriller, Regency romance, thriller, Regency romance. And I sent it around to, well, first of all, my existing publisher who published The Rag Witch. And they said, well, we really like the thriller part, we really like the Regency romance part, and we really hate the way they go together. Because your thriller readers aren't going to like the Regency romance. The Regency romance readers aren't going to like the thriller. I actually think they were possibly right then, possibly wrong now, and things flow together so much. But I couldn't sell it to anybody. So once again, my one-book wonder friend was, one-book wonder, muttering around, and published, and it just kept on going. But in actual fact, it wasn't like that. And I'm always very well aware that you just never know how things will go. I love writing books. I hope I get to keep writing them for a very long time. But you never know what can happen. You're only as good as your last book, and then you're taken out the back and shot. No, actually, that's not quite true. It's not quite as bad as that. Another question I get asked very frequently is, do you believe in magic? Do you believe in stuff that you can't explain? And I guess people ask me because, I write books about creatures coming back from the dead and about magic and all kinds of stuff like that. And I actually don't believe, I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I'm deeply fascinated in myth and legend and so on, but I don't believe in the supernatural. And that's what I normally say when someone asks me that question. So, well, I don't believe in the supernatural. And that's fine. But sometimes people go on and they say, okay, well, you don't believe in the supernatural, but have you ever had an experience that you can't easily explain? Have you ever had, seen a ghost? And often the people asking me this question have seen a ghost, and they say to me, I saw a ghost and this is what happened, or a poltergeist moved all this stuff around and so on. And again, usually I say, well, no, I've never had an experience like can't explain rationally. I'm a very rational person. But that's not entirely true, because about 9 years ago, I did have a very odd experience. It also has some bearing on my writing as well, because my book started, I sold my first books to be published in the UK around 9 years ago, and it does sort of time with this strange thing that happened. It was 9 years ago, I went on this long trip, travelling all the way through Eastern Europe and through the Middle East, with a group of people in a truck that had been converted into a bus. And we were going for about 4 or 5 months, down through Eastern Europe, through Turkey, Syria, Jordan, back up again through Turkey, across Iran into Pakistan, camping most of the time, and visiting amazing, historical sites, incredible places, Greek and Roman ruins, Crusader castles, and so on. And it was a fantastic trip for me, not least because I do a lot of my writing handwrite. I handwrite a lot of stuff. I handwrite in black and red notebooks like this one, except when I can't get them and I have to settle for horrible blue and white striped ones or something like that. So a lot of my books, I would write a chapter first longhand, and then I'd type it up when the opportunity presented itself on a computer, or I'd write a whole bunch of chapters longhand if I was away from power or a computer or whatever. And I still do that to some extent, though less so. So on that trip, I was seeing these amazing historical sites. I was being inspired by all the things that had happened, through the deep history of that region. And I love history, and I do find it very inspiring. And we're on the road, as I said, for quite a few months. And this weird thing I'm going to tell you about happened towards the end of the trip when we were in Iran, which of course is the modern name for the country we used to call Persia. A country that's steeped in myth and legend. It's from that part of the world that the stories of the 1001 Nights come from, and so on. And we got up very early in the morning from our campsite, and we drove out through the desert, going to Persepolis, the ruins of the ancient city that was the capital of the Persian Empire. I should say, for a lot of that trip, we were following the path of Alexander the Great's conquest eastward. And so we were in his footsteps, in Alexander's footsteps. And we arrived at Persepolis just after dawn, and I got out of our little truck bus, and I stood probably where Alexander the Great stood, where he watched the city burn thousands of years ago. And I walked down into the ruins. And I spent all day climbing around under the hot sun, looking at the statues of the winged lions and bulls and the Persian soldiers and so on, trying to imagine what this place must have been like when it was the thriving heart of an ancient empire. Then late in the afternoon, we got back on our little truck bus, and we set out across the desert again. And we're heading for a place called Nagsha Rostam, the tombs of the Persian kings of kings. And we were driving through the desert. It's flat desert, nothing to see, very, very tall mountains, very far off to the west. And we were driving along, and there was nothing, there was just nothing around. And then I saw that there was something ahead of us. There was this one lonely hill in the middle of nowhere. And as we got closer to it, I saw that it was a hill of golden stone, and that half of the hill had been sheared away. And as we got closer still, I saw that half of the hill completely cut away to make a cliff 300 or 400 feet high. And halfway up there was a temple facade carved into the cliff. And behind that temple facade were the tunnels, which were the tombs of the Persian kings of kings. And we pulled up at the base of the cliff near the fire temple there, the ruins of the fire temple. And everyone else started setting up camp, setting up the tents, getting out the gas cookers and so on. And I thought, well, you're not allowed to try and climb the cliff. You're not allowed to try and actually enter the temple facade and go into the tombs. But I thought, maybe if I go around the back, I'll be able to find, the back of the hill, I'll be able to find a little goat track, and I can climb to the top of the hill, and I can stand above the tombs, above the temple facade, and I can watch the sunset. And so I said, to my friends, why don't we go and watch the sunset from the top of the hill? But everyone was tired from climbing around the Persepolis all day. So I went by myself. And I did find a little goat track, and I walked up and I got to the very top of the cliff, just as the sun was dipping below the mountains to the west. And as it set, it had turned all red and bloody, and this strange red light was falling across everything. And I walked to the very edge, and I looked down, and I saw my friends down below, these little figures down below, and I could hear snatches of their conversation coming up. And I looked at my hands that were bathed in this strange red light. Then as I looked down again, I saw the red light catch something in my foot, glinting on something in my foot. And I bent down to pick it up. And it was a ring. This ring. And as I picked up the ring, I thought I heard someone say something right behind me. You know, I was on the edge of the cliff, so I stepped back and I looked around, but there was no one there. But then I put on the ring, and I heard that voice close to my ear. And it said, "For 9 years this ring shall bring you good fortune. But after 9 years have passed, so must the ring pass on, lest you reap a harvest of tears." Now, I freaked out. I ran back to the track, and I ran down, and I fell down, I skinned my knees, and I rushed back to the campsite. But as I walked into that harsh white gaslight, and everyone was sitting around eating their goat meat stew just like every other night, I thought, I've been in the sun all day. I've got sunstroke or heat exhaustion. I've got to drink some water. I'll drink some water and just calm down. And my heart was hammering a million beats a second. And I thought, I had heat exhaustion. I imagined that voice. But I still had the ring. And I've kept the ring all this time. And for 9 years, I have had good fortune. My books have become published in the United Kingdom. Other good things have happened. So I've always kept it, even though I've tried to not think about it. But then this morning, I woke suddenly and I felt that red desert heat. And I heard that voice again, close to my ear. And it said, "It is 9 years since you stood above the tombs of the kings of kings. Before another dawn breaks on Nagsha Rostam, the ring must pass on, lest you reap a harvest of tears." And so this ring that brings 9 years good fortune, must pass on. And I'm going to give it to the first person who puts up their hand. There we are, very swift reflexes there.